The greatest irony of being engaged with House of Leaves is that, by the time you're done, you realize you truly did get lost in a maze. Get lost in a good book, right? And so we did, with a novel that is, from cover to cover, a very finely designed labyrinth. Getting lost is quite literally the purpose. But is it any wonder this would happen for House of Leaves and its readers? Don't forget, this isn't just a labyrinth, it's Echo's chamber. That which occurs inside is reflected outward in an adjacent form. Not precisely parallel, but most certainly an echo of the original material. Johnny Truant, our narrator, discovers this crazy story, the Davidson Record, a manuscript about a film insisting it's a documentary, not a movie. These impossible events truly happened. Johnny goes absolutely mad over it, becoming obsessed, flying through footnotes, references, and pages already explored to make sense of it all. And here we are, the readers, doing precisely the same, now fully aware that we are reading a story that is absolutely impossible, but the narrator is trying to convince us of its reality. This isn't a novel, no, it's non-fiction. Johnny Truant swears by it, just like his echo, Will Davidson, swears by his documentary as real. Johnny can't come to terms with the conflicts of fiction and truth inside the Davidson Record. And after our journey, we realize we can't come to terms with the conflicts of fiction and truth presented by Johnny Truant. But that's natural for the situation, isn't it? After all, an echo reverberates throughout space as far as it can go, so of course the echoes end with the reader. Will Davidson echoes out into Johnny Truant. Johnny Truant echoes out into us. The audience for the story and its containing vessel, in whatever form it appears, will reflect the action and themes present. Nothing that touches the Davidson Record or its container House of Leaves is immune to that. The echo will continue to ring out and bring all of its sound through each containing layer until it finally decays into nothing. And maybe you noticed that already in a subconscious form. Have you really looked at the cover to House of Leaves as it's seen here? Look at the middle portion, the spiral. Imagine that in the very center, the absolute depth of the spiral, or say, the bottom of the grand staircase in the maze it represents, someone shouts. That echo will reverberate upwards and out, running along each curve and level until ending in open space. Of course, this spiral and the staircase do represent something else in House of Leaves, which, like everything else in the story, means just as much for Will Davidson and his family as it does for Johnny, but we'll be addressing that much later. For now, we have a much more urgent matter, one Zampano dismissed at the beginning of the Davidson Record: the antinomies of fact or fiction. We've learned about the events in both the Davidson Record and Johnny's life, especially his past, having read his mother's letters. We're aware of how deeply Johnny's life echoes the Davidson Record and how he and his struggle echo Will Davidson. Both men are haunted by a Minotaur in the interpretation provided by Zampano. Will Davidson's Minotaur is Delial. Johnny Truant's Minotaur is his mother, Pelafina. The problem we face is not precisely the Davidson Record's events or the outcome of Johnny's story as he finally comes to terms with the memory of his mother. What we face is a much more difficult task, using the maximum amount of clues, evidence, conflicts, and cohesive stories inside House of Leaves to figure out what all of it means and how it relates. Why is it Johnny Truant is able to resonate so deeply with the Davidson Record? Why does someone like Johnny feel he can intrude as much as he does on Zampano's work? How many lies did he tell us, and how many stories are true? What bearing does this even have on the story, and what does it mean in regards to Zampano and the Davidson Record? There are a lot of theories about the grand breakdown of House of Leaves and its meaning, and they've been hotly debated since the novel's publication. Mark C. Danilewski himself put together a forum on his website for readers to come together so they could talk about their findings. Did you know there are secret codes hidden in House of Leaves? I don't just mean in Pelafina's most horrifying letter either. I mean in the footnotes, in Johnny's diary entries, in Zampano's own text for the Davidson Record, and in the appendices. That's how deep this runs. You really do need notebooks, pencils, post-it tabs, and highlighters just to find as much as possible. There are references pulled up in this book that are real and relate to things outside the novel that bear meaning on the story. And when you get the answers, it still feels like another hallway opening inside the labyrinth that just doesn't fit in the grand scheme. Fitting this whole work into one theory is a Herculean task, and it makes sense too. Mark Z. Danilewski reportedly worked on House of Leaves for 10 years before it was published. It took a decade of retreading the book, tying pieces together, hiding things, making 100 subtle connections just to be done. This is, absolutely, a masterpiece of art and storytelling using methods that no one had even dared up to the point that it was tried. And that means 10 years of making sure this labyrinth, as crazy as it looks, does make sense. Why do you think there's an index in the book? He knew you would need it. Exploration of this material by readers provides the bedrock for all major theories out there, and we'll be analyzing the merit of each until we come to the point all readers find themselves concerning House of Leaves. A wall. A very satisfying wall, but a wall nonetheless. On this journey, do your best to remember the events of the Davidson record and Johnny's life alongside it. We'll revisit what we need to, but can't stop to review everything. There is a lot of ground to cover. Let's begin with the first theory, which most readers who experience the novel on a surface level run take away as the plot. For a moment, imagine we don't consider what an excellent liar and storyteller Johnny Truant is. Take all his accomplishments and conflicting accounts of behavior and character, all the evidence suggesting that he's anything other than what he claims, and put it aside. What are we left with? Only what he claims is true and what we suspect at the end if we're readers who fully believe him. Zampano was real. Johnny found the book precisely as he said, and the assistants of Zampano who claimed he possessed a strange aura were onto something. In this instance, Zampano is not precisely normal, or rather, he created something that isn't normal. And I don't mean that in the sense of a blind man writing a book. As you go through House of Leaves, completely immersed in echoing Johnny Truant's experiences with the Davidson record, you can't help but feel as if what's happening is every bit as paranormal as the events on Ash Tree Lane. This book does not feel like a book. It's powerful, palpable, creating an echo so strong it forces its way into the real world and creates a Minotaur for its reader. More so, it changes itself to reflect the action inside as part of the echo. We've already seen this at work when it comes to the layout of the novel, Holloway's window, the sudden twisting and turning of the footnotes, but there's so much more at play. Page 193. Navy and Reston find Jed and Wax hiding in a side room. Wax is dead, but Jed is alive, and for a moment we see his relief. Then, according to the text, a fraction of a second later, one bullet pierced his upper lip, blasted through the maxillary bone, dislodging, even fragmenting the central teeth. Reel 10, frame 192. And then in the following frame, Reel 10, frame 193, obliterated the backside of his head, chunks of occipital lobe and parietal bone spewed out in an instantly senseless pattern uselessly preserved in celluloid light. Then we're given the info Reel 10, followed by frames 194 through 205. Ample information perhaps to track the trajectories of individual skull bits and blood droplets, determine destinations, even origins, but not nearly enough information to actually ever reassemble the shatter. Do you know where we are in the book as this happens? Chapter 10, page 193. Where in the Davidson record does it say Jed was shot? Reel 10, frame 192, and then on Reel 10, frame 193, we see the bullet's damage begin, fragmenting Jed's skull and spilling its pieces across frames 194 through 205, still inside Reel 10. If you look at pages 194 through 205, there are fragments of sentences and isolated words as Jed dies and the bits of his brain and skull fly into space. These words follow the action completely and obey the information given. Reel 10 is Chapter 10 in House of Leaves. The frames cited in Reel 10 are the pages where all of this is happening. You're not just reading about it, you're seeing it yourself, witnessing the carnage acted out by the book using its layout. We witness the full end of Jed from a position at the very bottom of a page, reading, Jed crumples, his moment of joy stolen by a pinky worth of lead, leaving him dead on the floor, a black pool of blood spilling out of him. Page 233. A bullet from Holloway's rifle rings out, slamming into a door, though not powerful enough to do more than splinter a panel, kind of like splintering a sentence all across a single page. Chapter 11. Johnny Truant tells us this chapter about two brothers torn apart was torn to pieces by Zampano, and he tried to put it back together for us here. Every page is composed of fragmented passages standing side by side in columns. Two brothers. It's incredible to witness all the ways the book twists and turns to echo the action of the Davidson record. The story is literally changing the form of its presentation to reflect the content so an echo can be created to maximum effect. This even happens to Johnny Truant's diaries, like we see in the chapter SOS and chapter 18, when he begins writing with a sibilant F instead of an S based on Zampano's inclusion of the Old Explorer's diaries. Their diary entries in the chapter created an echo in Johnny's diary, affecting his writing. What truly becomes scary, however, is how much you begin to stare into the pages when you read Pelafina's letters after realizing they hold a new kind of echo. A connection that should be impossible. A connection that makes no sense. Something so sudden, so subtle, and so shocking you race back through the pages to see if you're remembering wrong. And then you find out you're horribly right. Page 325. In the climax of the Davidson record, we hold our breath, waiting to see what happens to Karen after she enters the hallway alone to rescue Will. Zampano writes, regardless of what finally enabled her to walk across that threshold, 49 minutes later a neighbor saw Karen crying on the front lawn, a pink ribbon in her hair, Davidson cradled in her lap. Page 599, The Whale's Toe Letters, June 26, 1984. Dear Johnny, your sentences cast spells. Once again you've turned your mother into a silly schoolgirl. Like Hawthorne's Faith, I put pink ribbons in my hair and subject everyone here, including of course the good director, to a complete account of your prodigious accomplishments. Page 320. Tom has broken his sobriety after losing Will in the hallway but comes out of a drinking binge. Zampano writes, toward midnight, Tom emerges from the study, steals a slice of lemon meringue pie and then whips out some hot chocolate for everyone. Page 588, The Whale's Toe Letters, November 7th, 1982. My sweet baby, I knew you'd find a home. Are you happy now? Do they serve you hot chocolate and large slices of lemon meringue pie? Does your new mother tuck you in at night and read you stories full of opal and jade? Page 315. For a while, Daisy and Chad try to coax their mother to even briefly abandon her post. When that fails, they hang around the living room. A few times, Karen asks them to at least keep together. Daisy, however, insists on hiding in her room where she can play endlessly with her prized Spanish doll in the dollhouse Tom finally finished for her. Page 610, The Whale's Toe Letters, September 30th, 1985. Your mother knows now how to get better so she can permanently leave the whale's toe. I have found the scissors to snip the black ribbons which bind me like a Chinese doll, blind me like the old Spanish doll I once guarded in the gables of a fantastic attic where we both awaited our execution. Page 58. We discuss how Karen Green suddenly stopped being joyful and confident at age 15, and Zampano writes, apparently, if her sister is to be believed, Karen spent every night of her 14th year composing that smile in front of a blue plastic-handled mirror. Page 615, The Whale's Toe Letters, April 5th, 1986. Practicing my smile in a mirror the way I did when I was a child, I lovingly remain, your mother. Page 41, Discussing the Myth of Echo, Zampano writes, another lesser-known version of this myth has Pan falling in love with Echo. Echo, however, rejects his amorous offers, and Pan, being the god of civility and restraint, tears her to Pisces, burying all of her except her voice. Page 599, The Whale's Toe Letters, September 7th, 1984. Dear, dearest Johnny, to endure over 2 months without a word and then with the first words learn such terrible news tore me to Pisces. And there are more connections to that, but if I pulled those out right now, they would tear your brain to Pisces. The point's been made. Pelafina is not just haunting Johnny. She and her letters are haunting the Davidson record. Pelafina is inside the Davidson record. That's impossible, you say. That can't be right. But here it is, plain as day, and the Whale's Toe Letters came a very long time before the Davidson record did. But now we have a conflict, don't we? Because we know the Davidson record has a form-changing effect on whatever containing media device presents its story. But is it possible for the story to be changing its form and details according to the reader's own history? If we use the idea of the echo in reverse after figuring out what's been going on with Johnny, we can see what Will Davidson was talking about in his letter to Karen and why things resolve as they do at the end. The hallway in the house on Ash Tree Lane exists to present a labyrinth that serves the same function seen in Zampano's interpretation of the Minotaur. It appears to give whoever enters the opportunity to confront their Minotaur and all the trauma involved in its creation. The evidence is overwhelming and spelled out for us in Chapter 17, which concerns theories from viewers on why Davidson went back to the house and, in fact, what happened to everyone who faced the hallway and survived at the end of the movie. The Haven-Slocum theory in this chapter presents the PEER system, Post-Exposure Effects Rating, which relates what everyone was dealing with after entering or witnessing the hallway. Then we have a re-evaluation when Karen and Will escape, showing resolution of all their issues using the same rating system. And of course, you might remember how the story of Will and Karen ends. They finally get married. They take the step that was haunting them the whole time, getting married, committing to each other, and that skin condition around Will's toe since childhood finally goes away. He stops having nightmares. he stops thinking about Delial. He is a committed husband and family man, living with his wife and the mother of his kids, putting his loved ones above everything. But why did Karen's rescue save Will and finally solve the hallway? Because she had Minotaurs of her own, and one of them was Will Davidson. Ages 16 to 17. We discuss Karen's past of cheating on Will, but a man named David Little brings up the idea Karen might not be the one to hold all the blame in the relationship, saying, if he has horns, who's to say he doesn't have whose? The reference in the footnote sources Little's work, titled A Horny Duo, specifically citing page 78. Let's go to page 78 in House of Leaves just for fun. What do we see? A diary entry by Johnny discussing the marks left on the floor next to Zampano's body and how one of his assistants was also witness to something big and monstrous stalking her from the darkness around his courtyard, both references to the force that seems to be hunting Johnny, the Minotaur. Due to Karen's traumatic past resulting in severe anxiety and claustrophobia, she was terrified of the hallway, and we knew that from the first time Will stepped inside. The story her sister told about that trauma appears to be true from everything else we've seen, noting how Karen began practicing her smile and had lost childhood joy at age 15. For Karen Green, a dark, enclosed space meant more than not being able to see or potential breathing issues. It meant prolonged suffering and fear followed by torment that takes decades to recover from. A hell that Johnny suffered thinking about his mother going through, never knowing if it was one of her hallucinations. At the same time, Karen was severely dependent on Will, a man who just kept leaving to travel the world, and Karen took a sense of safety in men who were nearby, who were available, who wouldn't just leave. Will Davidson also wouldn't get married. Why do you think the very first hallway appeared after Will and Karen came home from a wedding in Seattle? A wedding they attended with their children. Think about how that situation must have gone. Karen and Will get a house together after 11 years as a couple. It's a compromise. They don't need to get married. No, they don't need that. The house is good enough. Karen even says on video the house was supposed to make them stronger than any marriage. Then they take their kids and go to a wedding where there were probably other kids, most of whom had parents who were married. It is impossible under any measure of common sense to think that Chad and Daisy didn't ask their parents why they weren't married. Everyone else they'd ever known, all those other kids, they had parents who were married. They were at a wedding as a family, witnessing a marriage. Why weren't they a normal family? Why aren't mom and dad married? And so the giant, writhing can of worms opens up, and a hallway forms between the master bedroom and the kids' room. The house responded to the ultimate issue between Karen and Will, committing to each other and finally trusting themselves to be a family. That's why the hallway appeared. That's why the fighting started. That's why they stopped being intimate physically and emotionally. That one monster they thought they had buried by getting the house reared its ugly horned head and presented an entrance to its domain. So why did the second hallway appear in the living room, leading into the labyrinth? Because Karen and Will began ignoring their children and focusing on themselves and their own feelings about the first hallway. This created a new, bigger issue, the splintering of their family in the first official home they were meant to have together. The Minotaur for characters in the Davidson record is the same as it is for Johnny Truant, a being of pain, guilt, and fear, repressed and hidden away, not to be talked about, but very much there. This is why Zampano harped on the idea the Minotaur was a trope for repression and that it wasn't a monster, but a pitiful thing that deserved better than to be shoved down and blocked from sight. Doing so only created more problems and eventually led to anguish. Viewers of the Davidson record who guessed it was a manifestation of psychology were correct. The evidence is very convincing, and the Code of Echoes chamber proves it. The hallway, the labyrinth, it appears for those who witnessed the house on Ash Tree Lane in order to challenge them in resolving their anguish. It wants people to enter so they can have the revelations of King Minos before tragedy takes a life. This is why Will Davidson said he believed the house was God. Not because it was a mystical, awesome force beyond comprehension, but because it had a function that put a human being through a task so much bigger than them. Something beyond comprehension of one's ability to endure, but it made them better for it. The labyrinth of Ash Tree Lane makes you face the repressed memories and emotions of pain, guilt, anxiety, and fear that's hidden in the darkness of your mind. It presents you with the opportunity to face your Minotaur and make things right. That's why the memory of Delial pushed Will Davidson to go back inside alone, and that's why Karen going in after Will saved his life, stopped the hallway, and fixed all their major issues as individuals and a couple. Karen had to face all her Minotaurs at once, trying to rescue a man who she could never depend on from a claustrophobic nightmare. Karen Green faced her own personal hell just to say, "I do," even when she could never trust Will to do the same. In that moment, she committed to him, fully and completely, and the labyrinth set her free with the man she loved. And this is why the book worked for Johnny. It's also why, according to many readers, it heals them too. The echo effect truly is that powerful. Johnny, encountering the Navidson record, is made to face his Minotaur, and because the book itself seems to have sentience, because it can change its form just like the house, it changes the details to provoke a response in the psyche of the reader. It lets them know an echo is happening and that they're meant to see themselves in the work. It has a story it needs to tell them, and like all great stories, it just might make you better at the end. So, all those small details buried in Pelafina's letters that showed up in the Navidson record? The book could have been reading Johnny right back, doing what it was designed to do, opening a hallway and making him enter the labyrinth so he would face his Minotaur and find peace. Some have said the tale at the heart of House of Leaves is a love story, and in truth, yes, it is, but it's also a ghost story, and that haunted house helped the love story take place. It's both horror and romance rolled into one. This whole interpretation of House of Leaves presents a very sobering revelation, however. Zampano died facing his Minotaur. Those claw marks in the wood found next to his body are unmistakable, and whether or not that's what he wanted, well, it's a mystery, at least for now. There's evidence as to what is going on with that to be found both in Footnotes and Zampano's appendix, but for the moment, we need to take a step back and examine what we have here. In summation, Theory 1, Uncanny, gives us the following. Johnny Truant is real, Zampano is real, and his manuscript, the Navidson record, is real. The Navidson record is a paranormal echo chamber that changes its form depending on its method of interaction with the reader. The Navidson record's form changes are done to reflect the action in the story while changing its details to remind the reader of repressed memories and pains. All form changes based on the reader's history are hallway entrances to the labyrinth, the heart of the Navidson record. The labyrinth is the story's true function, inciting readers to face their Minotaur and resolve their issues. Minotaur hauntings begin after being exposed to the Navidson record and continue until its completion, at which point the reader will confront their Minotaur, otherwise known as their repressed trauma or severe mental emotional issues. Johnny Truant's mother Pelafina and his extreme guilt over her death and treatment of her was his Minotaur. Details from her letters and his own life appeared in the form-changing Navidson record to stir his entrance into the labyrinth and bring about the ending. Pelafina's letters were included by Johnny to explain what he couldn't fully put in writing himself. And that, largely, is the reasoning behind Theory 1. Admittedly, it makes for a great story, and once you make it through House of Leaves the first time, it's very easy to come away with this impression. But it doesn't explain a great deal of other mysteries and ignores a major amount of the information we're given in the appendices. It doesn't address how often Johnny Truant likes to throw in our face what a great liar he is either. Granted, there are sections of Theory 1 that absolutely ring true, and we have overwhelming, solid evidence for them. Dealil and Navy, Pelafina and Johnny, Will and Karen, the purpose of the house, the meaning of the actual Navidson record story. That all feels right. Zampano's interpretation of the Minotaur and the study of echoes are extremely crucial components to our understanding of the book as well, but we were given more than those pieces for very good reason. We need to address Johnny's habit of telling stories, telling us he's telling a story, letting us forget about that, and then getting mad that we keep believing him, all while swearing he's not trying to trick us even though he is constantly trying to trick us. The evidence for him trying to trick us goes well beyond being this incredibly bright guy who wouldn't intrude all over a poor dead old man's work. The text itself gives us another version of the Pelafina letter details revelation from Theory 1. On page 137, Zampano writes in the footnotes about the story of Kisana and Molino in an excerpt taken from his journal. One passage, which the editors claim was recovered by Johnny along with the other red text, reads as follows. Forgive me please for including this. An old man's mind is just as likely to wander as a young man's, but where a young man will forgive the stray, an old man will cut it out. Youth always tries to fill the void. An old man learns to live with it. It took me 20 years to unlearn the fortunes found in a swerve. Perhaps this is no news to you, but then I have killed many men and I have both legs, and I don't think I ever quite equaled the bald gnome error who comes from his cave with featherless ankles to feast on the mighty dead. During that footnote passage, we get direction to another footnote found on page 138 in red strike-through text. For instance, youth's peripatetic travails in the Pelican poems, a perfect example why errors should be hastily excised. We only know this writing says the Pelican poems because Johnny adds his own footnote saying, i.e., the Pelican poems. The editor then steps in and points us to Appendix 2b provided by Johnny Truant. This section marked the Pelican poems is indeed a series of poems. The majority of the poems include notes describing who the poem was for and where it was written. Most are in Europe and take place between May 26, 1988 and September 2, 1988, with one final poem from Paris on August 12, 1990. The first Pelican poem was written in New Haven, but the next 7 were written in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. Then we have Copenhagen in Denmark, Hamburg in Germany, Belgium, France, Spain, Rome, and other parts of Italy, Greece, Italy again, and for that final poem after the summer of 1988, Paris. We've seen a list like this before, haven't we? You might already remember where, but let's proceed to the end of Johnny's appendix and see the evidence tied into the Pelican poems first, the whale stow letters. November 27, 1988. So convinced such happiness has to be a dream, especially these days. I have repeatedly asked the director whether or not you were really here yesterday. One lifetime ago I was crouched in shadow, and in the next I am with you. How profound the difference. Your adventures in Europe caught me between heartbreak and laughter. You tell your story so well. All that tramping over the continent for 4 months with only a backpack, a Pelican pen, and a few $100s. That was said in November of 1988, when Johnny visited and told her all about that. Page 350, footnote diary 318. Johnny discusses his mother's locket and writes, I saw it again before I left for Europe. An essay I had written on the painter Paula DeVoe had won me an all-paid summer abroad. I lasted 2 days in the program. By the 3rd day I was heading for the station looking for something, maybe someone, a bindle on my back, a Eurorail pass in hand, not more than $300 in traveler checks in my pocket. I ate very little, hustled from place to place, peeking into Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Sweden before looping west so I could race all the way down from Denmark to Madrid. Chess games in Toledo, littered lore of Naples, ferry ride to Greece, back in Rome. In Paris I lived at the bistros during the night. The dates line up, the locations and even their pattern matches. And what's more, we catch Johnny's relation to Pelican pens in the story. Page 26, footnote 33. Just keep staring at all the ink we have, that wild variety of color. Everything from root beer, midnight blue, to cochineal, to mauve, light dough, lilac, South Sea green, maize, even Pelican black. Pelican black. Seems like a very odd description for black ink, doesn't it? Now let's go to one of the areas of the appendix Johnny provided, his collages. Page 583, collage number 2, what do we see? The label from a package of Pelican black ink pens. Johnny went to Europe for one summer in 1988, armed with only a backpack, a Pelican pen, and a few $100s. He went to Czechoslovakia, Poland, Sweden, Denmark, Madrid, Spain, Italy, Greece, Italy again, and then Paris. The Pelican poems were all written in the summer of 1988 in Europe in all the same places. Johnny Truant wrote the Pelican poems, named after the pen he used during the trip, a Pelican black. When the Pelican poems are first brought up in House of Leaves, it occurs in red strike-through text from Zampano, the writing Johnny claims he had to go through serious labor to uncover, and Zampano says this. For instance, use peripatetic travails in the Pelican poems, a perfect example why errors should be hastily excised. Peripatetic. Traveling from place to place, especially working in several establishments and traveling between them. Zampano knows the Pelican poems. He knows what they're about and how young the author was. He knows the difficulty of that young man's journey writing them while traveling from place to place. And he says this in red strike-through text, the kind meant to be hidden along with all of his discussion of the Minotaur and his interpretation. This should be impossible. Not even Pelafina hints at knowing about the Pelican poems, because if she had, she absolutely would mention them and praise Johnny. Her condition immediately declines after this and she dies. If Pelafina doesn't even know about the Pelican poems, Johnny never shared them, so we can rule out any idea of Johnny Truant being a published author of poetry with Zampano as one of his readers by sheer coincidence. Okay, but what about the idea from Theory 1, the form-changing manuscript? Could that give us the alibi? No luck. Remember what we said about Pelafina's letter details extending to more than just the Davidson record? We can find Pelafina inside Zampano's writing in the appendix too. Specifically, his poetry. Page 558, poem number 1, That Place. We have a verse that goes, "Not when the sun was out and games continued, certainly not when there was summer love and root beer." Page 593, the Whalestow Letters, August 19th, 1983. "May your summer be full of root beer, joy, and play, with terrible amounts of love, Mommy." And just for kicks, let's go back to that list of ink colors Johnny describes in one of his early diary entries. It begins with root beer, ends with Pelican black. Now let's revisit the most peculiar item Pelafina put in her letters, acrostics coding. Take the first letter of each word to spell out a secret message, right? Go back to Johnny's meeting with the band in the bar at the end of his diaries, page 514. They had discussed the footnotes, the names, and the encoded appearance of Tyrant on page 387, something I transcribed without ever detecting. Apparently they wondered a lot about Johnny Truant. Had he made it to Virginia? Had he found the house? Did he ever get a good night's sleep? And most of all, was he seeing anyone? Did he at long last find the woman who would love his ironies? Which shocked the hell out of me. I mean, it takes some pretty impressive back on page 117 close reading to catch that one. Both codes mentioned by the band can only be found using Pelafina's method. Page 387, go to the text reference by footnote 362. That house answers many yearnings remembered in sorrow. Tamiris. It's the name of a figure in Greek mythology who was struck blind by the muses after challenging them to a singing contest and losing. An allusion to Zampano, perhaps? More likely than not. Now let's go to page 117. Toward the middle of Johnny's writing up top, we catch this. A wild ode mentioned at New West Hotel over wine infusions, light, lit, lofted on very entertaining moods, yawning in return, open nights, inviting everyone's song. It breaks down to, a woman who will love my ironies. This is not the only time this code has been used in Zampano's text. It is not the only time it is used in Johnny's diaries. Johnny and Zampano are meant to be strangers to each other, but they're both using a code Pelafina taught Johnny in private letters. What's more, if you're willing to go the extra mile as a reader and pick up the companion to House of Leaves, the complete Whalestow Letters, you get the full run of everything Pelafina wrote, including letters Johnny never gave us in the final print for House of Leaves. Before the end of her life on Christmas Eve 1988, she wrote a letter to her son that contained this. I think you get this way of mine. Do you? I hope so. But if you don't, it's no matter, for I shall be just the same, standing by like some old, still-growing tree, her rustle lost in fall but found again come spring. And of course you can lean on me. You can hide in me too, high above, and when you are tired and wish to close your eyes you can rest in me. I will not go. Remember. I shall be your roots, and I will be your shade though the sun burns my leaves. I shall quench your thirst and I will feed you fruit though time takes my seed. And when you are lost and can tell nothing of this earth, I will give you hope. And my voice you will always hear, and my heart you will always share, for I will shelter you and I will comfort you. And even when I am nothing left, not even in death, I will remember you. In House of Leaves, page 565, the last poem Zampano wrote is titled, You Shall Be My Roots, and it goes like this. You shall be my roots and I will be your shade, though the sun burns my leaves. You shall quench my thirst and I will feed you fruit, though time takes my seed. And when I'm lost and can tell nothing of this earth, you will give me hope. And my voice you will always hear, and my hand you will always have. For I will shelter you, and I will comfort you. And even when we are nothing left, not even in death, I will remember you. The poem You Shall Be My Roots is an echo of the final lucid message Pelafina ever wrote to Johnny, and it was written by Zampano. And what's more, right now, at last, we can address what a lot of you have probably been wondering ever since the end of Will Davidson's final journey in the house. Why was the book he carried with him called House of Leaves? Why is this entire novel called House of Leaves? These two poems, Pelafina's and Zampano's echoes, are the reason. Because it is extremely likely there is no Zampano, There may never have been. Johnny Truant is more than likely the only author here. On page 350, Johnny writes, "No matter whether you're an electrician, scholar, or dope addict, chances are that somewhere you still got a letter, postcard, or note that's meaningful to you. Maybe only to you. It's amazing how many people save at least a few letters during their lifetime. Leaves of feeling. One in particular hides inside a locket shaped like a deer. Leaves of feeling. Leaves of paper. Leaves of a tree. I think you get this way of mine. Do you? I hope so. But if you don't, it's no matter, for I shall be just the same, standing by, like some old still-growing tree, a rustle lost in fall but found again come spring. And of course you can lean on me. You can hide in me too, high above, and when you are tired and wish to close your eyes, you can rest in me. I will not go. Remember, I shall be your roots, and I will be your shade, though the sun burns my leaves. I shall quench your thirst, and I will feed you fruit, though time takes my seed. And when you are lost and can tell nothing of this earth, I will give you hope, and my voice you will always hear, and my heart you will always share, for I will shelter you, and I will comfort you. And even when I am nothing left, not even in death, I will remember you." Pelafina, Johnny's mother, was his house of leaves, and he, in his love, wrote an echo back to her under his first pen name, Zampano. "You shall be my roots, and I will be your shade, though the sun burns my leaves. You shall quench my thirst, and I will feed you fruit, though time takes my seed. And when I'm lost and can tell nothing of this earth, you will give me hope. And my voice you will always hear, and my hand you will always have. For I will shelter you, and I will comfort you. And even when we are nothing left, not even in death, I will remember you." And he did too. The untitled fragment poem on page 563 is a capping statement on his experience after doing so. "Little solace comes to those who grieve, when thoughts keep drifting as walls keep shifting, and this great blue world of ours seems a house of leaves, moments before the wind." House of Leaves, in its entirety, is Johnny's longest letter to his mother. We were even given the most somber of clues early on. Page 609, September 19th, 1985. Pelafina tells Johnny their letters are being spied on and she has an ally sneaking them out. She says, "For now, all you need to do is place in your next letter a check mark in the lower right-hand corner. That way, I'll know you received this letter." On page 97, the beginning of the SOS chapter, we see Johnny's checkmark. He did receive that letter. And even if he didn't send one back then under her instructions, he did now. But why? Why would he do this? Why would Johnny go through all of this? Well, first, it's the only way he's ever known. He was a born writer and storyteller, so good that he could convince you there was a Zampano, while giving you all the clues to find out there never was, because he needed to be found out to gain closure. But also, I believe, because of another Wellstow letter he hid from us, found only in the complete edition. June 24th, 1984, in a letter she meant for Johnny's birthday 3 days prior, Pelafina writes, "One day I shall come through with more than books. By some early light I'll concoct the right tale, perfect the telling, something worthwhile and grand to be delivered later, much later, more than likely in the years to come, into your gentle little hands." I think Johnny offered her the same as penance. I think he built his mother a house of leaves, his very own letter, a tale in which to honor and keep her. And that's what we've been reading this entire time. He wrote for her the book she never got to write for him, and in honor of his mother, and painfully out of guilt, he used the pen name she granted him, Zampano. The most confusing discovery one can make reading the Wellstow letters and using Pelafina's code technique comes on page 615 of House of Leaves. After the sentence "so sad really" in the middle of the page, we have an odd statement suddenly interrupted by a question mark. If you take the ampersand and use its name as a full word, ampersand, you get the following message. "My dear Zampano, who did you lose?" Theories over this inclusion in the Whalestone letters rage to this day, many circling around the idea that Zampano was a real person independent of Johnny who knew Pelafina and was, somehow, able to see Johnny's messages and scan them for secret codes, which would have been impossible under several circumstances according to Johnny's lifestyle. There is evidence as to why this code deepens the idea Johnny has always been Zampano. First, bear in mind that Johnny doesn't seem to use real names for anybody who's important in the entire run of his storytelling. Johnny Truant, Lude, Thumper, Blaze. Let's say he really did find the old black trunk with Lude, went through it and found this dead old man's manuscript. Was he really going to try putting it into the world with his insane diaries and snide remarks all over it under a name that someone could recognize? No, never. Johnny Truant is smarter than that. That's why he gave himself a pen name as Johnny Truant. If Zampano actually had friends or family, Johnny would have been ruined for his actions, so the old man got a pen name too. Second, images of evidence from Zampano's trunk and his appendix reveals that not only are we meant to see the concept of he and Johnny being one person, we find notes from somebody researching the name Zampano. Page 552, we have the last photo in Appendix 1C, with its first appendix being Zampano's. In the upper right corner, Zampano discusses the possibility of rewriting a crucial scene in the Davidson record, musing over the idea of killing Chad and Daisy and punishing Will and Karen for their narcissism. Except the writing is in Johnny's font, Courier. The writing style is even reminiscent of Johnny's. Now, take a look to the right and turn the book upside down. On this card we have a reference. Essays in Criticism, Federico Fellini, edited by Peter Bondinella, Oxford University Press 1978, pages 39 and 54. It takes a bit of looking, but you can find that book. Federico Fellini was an Italian writer and director, and these pages reference one of his films, La Strada, in which one of the main characters is named Zampano. Mercifully, you can watch La Strada on YouTube with subtitles and a transcript, and it's exactly as enlightening as you might think. In La Strada, Zampano is a traveling circus performer and con artist pulling a strongman act. He ties a chain around his chest using a hook and hypes up the crowd by telling them how strong the chain is, but never talks about how weak the hook might be. In one scene he says, "Once, in Milan, a 260-pound man lost his eyesight doing this. The optic nerve has to do all the work, and when you've lost your eyesight, it's all over." On page 582 in House of Leaves, in the lower right corner, we see a strip of paper in Italian. If you translate it, you discover it's precisely the lines that Zampano says before his act, which could result in going blind if you do it wrong. This, of course, is a ridiculous lie, just like his strongman act. He flexes his torso muscles all around, pushing the chain out and stretching the hook until it lets go. An easy feat when the chains are strong and the hook is weak, but no one knows you're lying. And after all, you're entertaining them. In the beginning of the film, Zampano ends up at the house of Jelsa Mina, a girl with many sisters cared for by their poor mother. Her older sister Rosa was Zampano's assistant on the road and he paid good money to take her from home, but somewhere along their travels, Rosa died. Now Zampano needs a new assistant, and he buys Jelsa Mina from her mother to be Rosa's replacement. Jelsa Mina has never seen much of the world and is easily enchanted by Zampano's act, the places they go, and what he teaches her for assisting him, but he is not a nice man. He hits her, he talks down to her, he strikes her with a switch when she messes up, and he's overall a very cold person. Jelsa Mina enjoys the life that comes with helping Zampano, but she does not like him. He might be an artist, but he's a brute and a fraud. Zampano drinks. Zampano leaves Jelsa Mina on the road at night so he can use their caravan to sleep with strange women. Zampano doesn't make friends, and when they don't make money performing, they take clothing or food as compensation. Eventually, they join a traveling circus with a prominent performer called the Fool. The Fool constantly makes fun of Zampano because he knows the trick behind the strongman act. While talking to Jelsa Mina the day following a performance, the Fool splashes Zampano with a bucket of water. Zampano chases him with a knife and is arrested. The next day, Jelsa Mina faces a choice. Take the caravan to the station and pick up Zampano upon release, or go with the circus. She talks to the Fool, who is supportive, but overall flippant about her dilemma. He mentions that Zampano might treat her like property, but he does seem to care in his own strange way. Jelsa Mina takes faith in his words and decides to wait with the caravan, saving Zampano's livelihood, and they hit the road again. They continue touring for a bit, Jelsa Mina playing a song Zampano taught her on the trumpet and portraying a clown to accompany his act. Eventually, they come across the Fool on the side of the road, his car broken down. The Fool can't help himself. He makes fun of Zampano even from his current position, and a knockout punch ends up landing him in such a way that his head strikes the car. The fool gets up, walks for a bit, and then collapses. Zampano and Jelsa investigate the body and find the man is dead. Jelsa is absolutely horrified. Zampano, however, pushes his car off the road into a ravine, making it look like an accident. He forces Jelsa to get in the caravan, and they flee. Jelsa's spirit is now utterly broken. She performs poorly in their act and is always sad. Zampano claims he can't understand her issue, but it's clear that somewhere inside, he does regret what happened with the fool. He hadn't meant to kill the man. They go to sleep, and while Jelsa is out, Zampano gathers up their things and packs the caravan. He leaves the trumpet with Jelsa and abandons her on the road. Years later, outside a traveling circus stop, Zampano hears a woman singing a familiar song, the very same he taught Jelsa. He asks where she learned it and is told her father found a young lady on the beach one day who was sick with fever. She was an odd sight, carrying only a trumpet, unable to speak, just crying for days. Finally, she got somewhat better and began to play her trumpet, teaching the family her song. But one morning, she didn't wake up. The fever had returned, and she died in her bed. That night, Zampano goes to a bar, gets drunk, starts a fight, and is thrown out. He ends up on the beach where his guilt finally overtakes him and he collapses on the sand, sobbing. It's the very same beach where Jelsa had been found, who he had abandoned, an innocent girl who died because he abandoned her. Zampano's heart is filled with grief and regret, and he is inconsolable, realizing now the full weight of his actions. Does this story sound familiar to you? Will Davidson and Delio, Johnny and the Pekingese, Johnny and his mother, Zampano and Jelsa. And if we look at the pages referenced in the book cited, we find our theory surrounding the central theme of House of Leaves and the Zampano connection confirmed. The first page highlights the start of the essay on Lustrada, making it clear this is where we need to be. Page 54 provides this. The filmmaker's own comment suggests that enlightenment and self-discovery will lead to change. The cry of Zampano as he claws the sand at the end of the film is not that of a wounded beast, but the anguish of a human being in his birth pangs. What Zampano has done to Jelsa can be described as tragic, for no amount of tears will ever bring back the love that she once offered him, and which he blindly trampled beneath his feet. Nonetheless, Jelsa's sacrifice eventually becomes the means of Zampano's redemption. Such is the meaning of Jelsa's life and death, and such is the lesson Zampano has begun to grasp at that final moment. Of course, what helps to make Lustrada so unforgettable is that Fellini subjects not only Zampano, but also the viewer, to the same recognition. Now look at the way we end our time with Johnny Truant after he completes the Davidson record, pages 516 to 517. I've wandered as far west as I can go. Sitting now on the sand, I watch the sun blur into an aftermath, reds finally marrying blues. Soon night will enfold us all. Johnny relives his mother's departure, seeing that her false memory had been wrong, and he had bought into it by choice, dismissing and abandoning her, turning away her love. I couldn't stop crying. I'd never cried that much before. I'm crying now. All these years, and now I can't stop. I can't see. I couldn't see then. Zampano, the blind man who wrote the Davidson record. Zampano, the performer who ends up crying for Jelsa on the beach at the end, a con artist who always told the crowd he could be rendered blind by his act. And now, Johnny Truant, crying for his mother on the beach at the end, a storyteller and proud liar saying that he couldn't see. He can't see. All this time, he couldn't see. Just a blind man. And Pelafina, his Jelsa, had granted him the pen name he used to write the whole story of Lustrada in his own echo version. Johnny didn't end up at the beach with the Davidson record because it had the power of echo. He ended up there because he knew, at last, it was the only place he could go. His work as Zampano was done, and the movie was coming to a close. It was time to meet his mother's justice. Lustrada was a black and white foreign film that came out in 1954. The likelihood that Pelafina would have seen it is quite high, considering her age and her character. You might also notice that two names have a ring to them. Jelsa, Pelafina. That doesn't seem like an accident. But why would Pelafina have said such a thing in her letter? Why refer to her son this way? Did she really see him in a similar fashion to Fellini's Zampano? She knew Johnny had the heart of an artist but was a fair bit of a brute, always getting into fights at school and traveling the world, sometimes roaming the streets on his own. Did she see herself as a Jelsa Mina? Is it possible that she was referring to a different Zampano reference, but this is the one that Johnny found and the one Mark Danielewski intended for us to connect? The reference is obvious with this much evidence. Zampano and House of Leaves is absolutely Lestrada's Zampano, and they are both directly reflecting Johnny Truant, whose behavior throughout House of Leaves and constant echoing of the Davidson record makes the most sense when he's the one true author. But what about Pelifina's intention? Was she really speaking to Johnny? And was it Fellini's Zampano? Well, that's what brings us to the final set of hallways, because now we're facing a wall. Time to take a turn and hopefully find something to make light of this. But our next hallway is where our journey gets especially hard. Everyone in House of Leaves has a Minotaur, that's clear, and along the way, keeping in mind what we know about the scene of Zampano's death, with those claw marks in the wood, we can't help but think about his Minotaur. On page 335 toward the bottom, we have this writing by Zampano. Except the vandal known as Myth always slaughters reason if she falters. Myth is the tiger stalking the herd. Myth is Tom's Mr. Monster. Myth is Holloway's Beast. Myth is the Minotaur. Myth is Redwood. And here we see a footnote, 299. Checking the reference, we're told by Johnny to go to Appendix B. That's Zampano's Appendix B, where he has diary entries that are all supposedly copied by his assistants. Page 547, December 18th, 1996, we have this. The cats have been dying and everyone wonders why. I can hear my neighbors murmur. They murmur all the time. It's strange. Some cats die, some just disappear. No one knows why. Redwood. I saw him once a long time ago when I was young. I ran away and luckily, or no luck at all, he did not follow me. But now I cannot run, and anyway this time I am certain he would follow. Going to the index, there's no other entry for Redwood that's pertinent to a being that can be related to Myth or the Minotaur. It seemed the trail went cold. But, like Zampano's name, the information needed can be found outside the novel. And the source for this one is not what you expect.
When your father was diagnosed with cancer, you wrote a story, a long story, a novel.
Right, it was called Redwood. I wouldn't call it a novel. It was
a really long short story about how you felt about your father.
Absolutely.
And what happened?
I wrote it on a Greyhound bus. 3 days, 3 nights solid. And my father had been admitted to the hospital with kidney failure, and he had recovered, had come home and was recuperating, and as it turned out his cancer would go into remission for a year and a half. And you know, he became very curious about my trip, and I've been writing, and my sister was there, and so I presented him with this story. And I read parts of it, and it was a dedication to him. You know, it was you know, this raw desire to express the love I felt for my father. And he responded by saying, you know, you should go get a job at the U.S. Postal Service. Art is absolutely useless.
But he was an artist.
Yeah, there was a lot of. He was a very competitive man. It's not a coincidence that both my sister and I started to succeed after he passed away.
As you might have guessed, that was an interview with Mark Danielewski himself back in the early 2000s. There's another interview online in text form that tells us more about Redwood and the circumstances under which it was presented to his father. 1990. My father was head of the USC School of Theater. I was living in New York. Then I got the phone call. The "Mark, your father is dying" phone call. He was in the hospital, renal failure, cancer. I got on a Greyhound bus and headed west. Over the course of 3 sleepless nights and 3 sleepless days, I wrote a 100-plus page piece entitled Redwood. I remember using a fountain pen. I barely had the change to buy sodas and snacks along the way, and there I am scratching out words with this absurdly expensive thing of polished resin and gold. I'd like to say it was a Pelican, but I don't think that's correct. Another thing I seem to remember, the paper I was writing on had a pale blue cast to it. There was also something about how the pen seemed to bite into the paper at the same time as it produced these lush sweeps of ink, a kind of cutting and spilling, almost as if a page could bleed. My intention had been to present this piece of writing as a gift to my father. As has been mentioned many times before, my father responded with the suggestion that I pursue a career at the post office. I responded by reducing the manuscript to confetti, going so far as to throw myself a pity parade in a nearby dumpster. My sister responded by returning later to that dumpster, rescuing the confetti, and taping it all back together. Does this story sound familiar to you? It's present inside House of Leaves in an echo. Chapter 11, page 248. Johnny explains what happened to these pages and why they're all torn up, speaking with one of Zampano's former assistants. She informs him that for 2 weeks they worked on this chapter, which dealt with the story of Jacob and Esau, two brothers from the Bible who were sons of Isaac, a blind man favored by God who could bestow a blessing on one of his sons. Then one day I arrived at his place and the pages had vanished, the assistant said. Also, all his fingers were bandaged. I asked him about our work, but when I persisted, he muttered something like, "What difference does it make? They're dead anyway, right? Or not alive, however you want to look at it." He just said it was too personal, an unrealized theme, poorly executed, and a complete mess. Zampano said something about there never having been a blessing to begin with. No birthright, all of it a misleading ploy, both brothers fools, and it wasn't justifiable to compare it to Will and Tom Davidson. When the assistant went to the bathroom, she found the pages in the trash, torn to shreds, some pieces stained with blood. She put them all into her pockets and later into an envelope, which she placed at the bottom of the trunk. Zampano's chapter on brothers, which was too personal, had been torn to shreds and thrown away. He speaks in moments on Redwood, which Mark Danilevsky had torn to shreds and thrown away, another piece you could describe as too personal. Both documents were rescued by a woman who collected the pieces in an envelope and returned them to the writer. By the way, we know what Zampano's torn chapter was about, but what was Redwood about for Mark? Apparently, a tiger, a white tiger, with lush stripes of ash. And curiously, it's a reinvention of something I wrote 5 years earlier. Mark goes on to describe how in the summer of 1985 he went to Paris to stay with his brother and wrote a story on a typewriter he called Where Tigers Dance. Paris. Paris in 1985, writing away on a typewriter. Reminds us of someone we know, doesn't it? Someone who wrote a lot in Europe around that time and speaks in typewriter font. But we'll get to that in a moment. Right now, let's redirect to some odd passages in Zampano's appendix. November 1st, 1968. A sun to read the dark. A sun to rend the dark. September 21st, 1970. Perhaps in the margins of darkness I could create a sun who is not missing, who lives beyond even my own imagination and invention, whose lusts, stupidities, and strengths carry him farther than even he or I can anticipate, who sees the world for what it is. His shields are instantly available, though seldom used. And this leads us to a couple of diary entries from Johnny that are quite odd. Page 337, Zampano has a footnote containing red strikethrough text related to the tale of the brass bull, a torture and execution device ordered by a tyrant, Phalaris, whose first victim was its inventor, Perlas. A person would be placed inside and burned alive, and their screams would travel through pipes and come out in a musical fashion through the bull's head. Johnny thinks about Zampano in regard to that idea, the pipes in his head working overtime. A few hours drift by. I broke off to shovel some feeling back into my knees and try to make sense of the image now stuck inside my head. It's been haunting me for a good hour now, and I still don't know what to make of it. Zampano is trapped, but where may surprise you. He's trapped inside me, and what's more, he's fading. I can hear him just drifting off, consumed within, digested I suppose, dying perhaps, though in a different way, which is to say, yes, thou sees me not, old man, but I know thee well, though I don't know who just said that. And not particularly important, especially since his voice has gotten even fainter, still echoing in the chambers of my heart, sounding those eternal tones of grief, though no longer playing the pipes in my head. I can see myself clearly. I am in a black room. My belly is brass and I am hollow. I am engulfed in flames and suddenly very afraid. How am I so transformed? Where, I wonder, is the Phalaris responsible for lighting this fire now sweeping over my sides and around my shoulders? And if Zampano's gone, and I suddenly know in my heart he is very, very gone, why does strange music continue to fill that black room? How is it possible the pipes in my head are still playing, and who do they play for? And now, page 326. Johnny discusses how the Davidson record feels like a body, like some kind of creature that will die without him. I'm its source, the one who feeds it, nurses it back to health, he says. Without me, it would perish. except these days nothing's obvious. There's something else. More and more often, I've been overcome by the strangest feeling that I've gotten it all turned around, by which I mean to say, the state that not so obvious. Without it, I would perish. This terrible sense of relatedness to Zampano's work implies something that just can't be, namely that this thing has created me. Not me onto it, but now it onto me, where I'm nothing more than the matter of some other voice, intruding through the folds of what even now lies there agape, possessing me with histories I should never recognize as my own. Inventing me, defining me, directing me until finally every association I can claim as my own, from Raymond to Thumper, Cory to Ashley, all the women, even the shop and my studio and everything else, is relegated to nothing, forcing me to face the most terrible suspicion of all, that all of this has just been made up, and what's worse, not made up by me, or even for that matter Zampano, though by whom I have no idea. What's happening here, if you've picked up on what Johnny was saying in all of these passages, should be taking a serious toll on your mind. We are being given an idea for the first time on 2 counts. Zampano as the creator of Johnny Truant, who was looking to fill a void by creating a fictional young man who discovered his work, a son to rend the dark, a son who is not missing, and Johnny Truant expressing belief that he himself might not even be real, validating the idea that Zampano made him, but he doesn't suspect that he was created by Zampano. From the tearing of the chapter concerning brothers and the way it was rescued, to how very personal it was, to the still unexplained Z in Mark Z. Danilevsky's name, to the inclusion of an epigraph for chapter 20 by the musician Poe, Mark Z. Danilevsky's sister, who wrote a companion album to House of Leaves called Haunted, we should be getting highly suspicious. Knowing about Zampano's Minotaur being redwood, which Mark described as a white tiger, should immediately bring to mind the most mysterious aspect of Zampano's death, the long claw marks in the floor next to his body, which is, again, highly suspicious. Johnny Truant expressing ideas about Zampano being burned inside him as if he were a brazen bull, with Zampano taking the place of Inventor, should make us highly suspicious. Now, put all that suspicion and the big pile of evidence behind it in one place, and stare at it. What do you see? Is it something impossible again? Something that flies completely in the face of everything we've gone this whole time trying to reveal. It's crazy, and it's contradictory, and it tears your mind to Pisces, but it's true. Zampano is Mark Z. Danilevsky, but that's not all.
In all the things I've read about you, you talk about your relationship with your sister, certainly your relationship with your father. You never talk about your mom.
My mother's a very special woman. She's gone through an enormous amount of changes, and early on she was very much, obsessed with my father, with a certain lifestyle, and at the time of the divorce, which was in '84, she suffered a great deal, and I did not talk to my mother for probably 4 or 5 years after the divorce, nor did my sister. She, in essence, had a nervous breakdown.
Johnny Truant is Zampano. Zampano is Johnny Truant. And Mark Danilevsky is both of them. There is, after all of this alluding and allegory and tying together of echoes across the span of House of Leaves, one factor we have not mentioned. It is actually the most important factor. Page 502, Johnny writes, I cannot tell you why I didn't see her until now, and it wasn't a scent that brought her back either, or the wistful edges of some found object or any other on-the-road revelation. It was my own hand that did this. Maybe you saw her first, caught a glimpse between the lines between the letters like a ghost in the mirror, a ghost in the wings. My mother is right before me now, right before you. She is here now. She has always been here. Yes, she's always been here, hiding in Echo's chamber the entirety of House of Leaves. And what was it we learned about Echo from Zampano? What was the crucial interpretation about Echo and the effects of echoes we needed to understand? To illustrate the multiple resonances found in an echo, the Greeks conjured up the story of a beautiful mountain nymph. Her name was Echo, and there are 2 versions of her story. In one version, she helps the god Zeus cheat on his wife Hera and is punished, making it impossible for her to say anything except the last words spoken to her. Soon after, Echo fell in love with Narcissus, whose obsession with himself caused her to pine away until only her voice remained. In a different version of the tale, the god Pan falls in love with Echo, is rejected, and is torn to Pisces, as Pelafina once wrote. In both cases, unfulfilled love results in the total negation of Echo's body and the near negation of her voice. Echo, a beautiful Greek myth forever bound in two stories, and no matter which one is true, the ending is always the same. All that's left of her is a voice. A woman whose existence to us is only her voice appears in only one form in House of Leaves, and that woman is forever bound in two stories, the tale of reality and the myth of hallucinations. Pelafina is more than Johnny Truant's Minotaur. She is Echo, and House of Leaves is her chamber. Like the Echo of legend, she lives in two versions of origin story, things that are true and things that are imaginary, and it's impossible for us to know the real story, as is the case with any ancient myth that has variations. Like her two stories, she has two storytellers, Zampano and Johnny Truant, who, when you step back and look at the evidence, reveal themselves to be the same man. In the chapter about echoes, Zampano's point is that an echo version of something can bring us new perspective and interpretation, despite being precisely the same in foundation. Echoes are not opposites. They're not parallels. They're adjacent. North wall, west wall. Page 45. Look to the sky. Look to yourself and remember, we are only God's echoes, and God is Narcissus. Rose's pronouncement recalls another equally important meditation. Why did God create a dual universe? So he might say, be not like me, I am alone, and it might be heard. Now look at the footnote that comes with that statement, number 57. It's a message from Johnny Truant. These lines have a familiar ring, though I've no clue why or where I've heard them before. And right beneath that footnote, the editors themselves say, though we were ultimately unsuccessful, all efforts were made to determine who wrote the above verse. We apologize for this inconsistency. This is the closest admittance we'll ever get from Johnny, aka Zampano, aka Johnny, about what's happening here. Dual universe, Echo's chamber, two versions of the story, same ending. So, we've had a lot of talks about the meaning of the novel.
Oh, yeah.
And just the nature of everything in it, that especially after a recent third way through, I've got to ask, the idea of Zampano versus Johnny, the Davidson record, what do you think is actually going on here? Who wrote it, honestly?
I don't think it matters. I think, for the most part, it's Mark Z's whole thing, but in the end, whether it's Johnny or Zampano or it's an actual project or a dissertation on a movie that Zampano saw somehow, I don't really think it matters who made this novel. I think it matters that the ideas are in it.
So the outcome really is all that seems to matter, despite the way up to it?
I feel like that's how most mazes go, though. Like, it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there in the end.
As long as you escape.
Yeah.
And that's the truth, isn't it? It doesn't matter how you got through the maze, even if there are 2 paths you can take. Even if there are 10, the story remains the same. You entered a maze, you got lost, you escaped, and you're left with your feelings from the experience. The story of Echo is the same. So is the story of Pelafina and the man who calls himself Johnny Truant and Zampano. Now, does that mean automatically that the character who created both Zampano and Johnny as the legitimate author in the universe of House of Leaves is Mark Danilewski? No, because it's all part of the design. Let's say Johnny Truant is the real author who made up Zampano and it was his pen name. We have a case of a young man writing a somewhat autobiographical tale in the form of a labyrinth hiding behind a mask, trying to confess the agonies of his life through allegory and playing fast and loose with the ideas of authorship and fact or fiction. Now let's say Zampano is the real author who made up Johnny Truant and it was his pen name. We have a case of an old man writing a somewhat autobiographical tale in the form of a labyrinth hiding behind a mask, trying to confess the agonies of his life through allegory and playing fast and loose with the ideas of authorship and fact or fiction. Zampano's appendix, when studied, is extremely revealing in showing just how much pain he was in and how many family members he lost, and the evidence compiled reveals him to be an echo of Will Davidson. The strongest evidence for it lies in Will's confession letter to Karen, where there's read strike-through text from Zampano talking about soldiers he missed. Reading Zampano's appendix, you'll find that he was at war himself and has lived much of his life thinking about the men he knew that died, recognizing tributes to veterans, and even showing his expertise in recognizing weapons. Will Navidson was a soldier. It's where he got his start photographing scenes of carnage that compelled him to show the world the evils it could commit. Johnny Truant has never had a brother that we know of, and while we know Will Navidson to be an incredibly strong echo of Johnny, we're left wondering why Navy loses his brother Tom in such a horrific fashion. When you try to find a relation to it outside the Navidson record, the only thing you can pull up is the chapter Zampano wrote about brothers, one of whom betrayed the other and was given God's blessing, and the chapter was so painful and deeply personal for Zampano that he tore it up. That whole chapter was about trying to relate the story of Jacob and Esau to Will and Tom Navidson, so if that factor of character echo didn't belong to Johnny, guess who it belonged to? And as for pain beyond this, pain that would have shown up in the Navidson record, hidden in plain sight just as surely as Johnny Truant's, we have it. Page 35, a Johnny Truant diary describes meeting Amber, one of Zampano's assistants, who says, "I never got the idea he had a family. I asked him once, and I remember this very clearly. I asked him if he had any children. He said he didn't have any children anymore. Then he added, 'Of course, you're all my children,' which was strange since I was the only one there. But the way he looked at me with those blank eyes, it was like that tiny place of his was suddenly full of faces and he could see them all, even speak to them. It made me real uneasy, like I was surrounded by ghosts." In Zampano's appendix, we have diary pieces about wanting a son to rend the dark, a son who is not missing, who lives beyond even my own imagination and invention, he writes. We have a telegram from April 29, 1975 addressed to a child that says, "Mother wants you to call home." And on the last diary bit, we have this, "I miss you." And now, just before the final poem in Zampano's appendix, "You Shall Be My Roots," which is an echo of Pelifina's letter to Johnny, we have a passage written in French. Its title means, "The Leaves." Here's the translation. It was autumn. It was autumn and it was the season of war. Do you remember the war? Me, less and less, but I remember autumn. I can still see the mist on the meadows next to the house, and beyond, the silent oaks in the twilight. The leaves had fallen since September. They browned and then challenged the spirit of my youth and also the spirit of the time. Remember, I was going to the woods. I crossed the fields and I lost myself for a long time below the branches, in the shadows among the leaves. Once before entering the woods, I remember that there was a dark horse staring at me from afar. He was at the bottom of the little field. I imagined he was looking at me while he was probably sleeping. Why do I now think of this horse? I do not know. Perhaps for the same reason I think of all these words I wrote at the same time. I kept the sheet where I had written down everything that came to my mind. At the time, I thought they belonged to me, but now I know I was wrong. Every time I read them, I see that I was copying only what someone had told me. Do not be afraid. I will not stop. I must discover this clearing, and I will not stop until I find it. Do you know what drives me to look for her? Well, nobody. My wife is dead. My wife, my daughter, and my son are all dead. Do you remember how they died? Me, less and less. I only remember time. My wounds are no longer deadly, but I'm scared. I'm afraid I cannot find this clearing. I stayed a while watching the shadows, the leaves, and the branches. Then when I left the wood, I saw only the fog around me. I could not see the house or the meadows, only the fog. And of course, the black horse was gone. Looking for her, a dead wife, and the man described had also lost his daughter and son. In Zampano's manuscript, the Navidson record, we have his echo, Will Navidson, his girlfriend Karen Green, and their son and daughter, Chad and Daisy. And in this appendix, we have a note card talking about killing Chad and Daisy in the final draft to punish Karen and Will, in Johnny Truant's font. Young man, old man. And yet their hearts are the same. Their writing styles are the same. Their pain of loss is the same. Their vehicles of repression are the same. And their relationship is intertwined in the most inconceivable ways, both of their histories showing up in the Navidson record in a startling manner, a mix of Johnny and Zampano wrapped up in Will Navidson's character and family. Pelifina, the true writer's mother, always showing up inside the work in surprising ways, her touch present in Zampano's writing and Johnny's diaries, even revealing herself at points to be Karen Green. And when we dial it all back, what do we find? Mark Z. Danilevsky, the author at the very top level, doing precisely the same, aspects of his past bleeding into the work in very critical ways. Do you see how strong the echo is now? Let's revisit our breakdown. Say Johnny Truant is the real author who made up Zampano and it was his pen name. We have a case of a young man writing a somewhat autobiographical tale in the form of a labyrinth hiding behind a mask, trying to confess the agonies of his life through allegory and playing fast and loose with the ideas of authorship and fact or fiction. Say Zampano's the real author who made up Johnny Truant and that was his pen name. We have a case of an old man writing a somewhat autobiographical tale in the form of a labyrinth hiding behind a mask, trying to confess the agonies of his life through allegory and playing fast and loose with the ideas of authorship and fact or fiction. Now see Mark Danielewski, the real author who made up Johnny Truant and Zampano as characters and pen names, a young man at the time writing a somewhat autobiographical tale in the form of a labyrinth hiding behind masks, trying to confess the agonies of his life through allegory and playing fast and loose with the ideas of authorship and fact or fiction. And it all has to do with the echo effect and allegory, right up to the top level, because this is a novel so meta that the book itself changes its layout to reflect the action. Mark Danielewski has gone on record about Redwood, Zampano's Minotaur. He's gone on record about the Pelican poems being his own writing, some of which are still out in the wild, kept safe by the people he wrote them for. He is Zampano and he's Johnny Truant, and both of these characters in universe are the same man. And that's why Johnny Truant always felt safe walking all over Zampano's work with his crazy intrusions. That's why he kept showing us all of his lies, proving what a good storyteller he was, getting angry at us for believing him. He needed us to discover that he was Zampano. Zampano needed us to know he was Johnny, that they were the same man wrapping themselves in fiction begging to be heard, a confusing, inseparable meshing of characters. Johnny, Zampano, same men but different. Echoes of one another. Two stories for one Pelafina. Pan and Echo, Zeus and Echo, North Wall, West Wall. Zampano very well could have been in possession of letters from his wife, the mother of their children, and as he wrote the Invention record to memorialize her, he expressed his desire to have a son who is not missing, to fill the void, and created Johnny for that purpose, imbued with all the qualities of the missing son. Johnny could have been the legitimate author, crafting Zampano in order to write the Invention record in disguise. After all, as he said, we all create stories to protect ourselves. Pelafina truly could have been his mother, who he feels responsible for abandoning, which resulted in her demise. And just as Johnny has shown that he's capable of writing the Davidson record, he could have easily fabricated Zampano. And it could be a blend of any of those facts. Zampano could have been Pelafina's son, but had also suffered the losses that are distinctly his while having Johnny's past. There's no ability for us to fully extract details of each myth and put them in the right place. Pan and Echo, or Zeus and Echo. Zampano's the real author who made Johnny, or Johnny's the real author who made Zampano. Choose your path. The ending remains the same. One author real, the other false. It's all the same struggle in the mind of a schizophrenic woman mourning while drowning in a sea of love for her son. And that is why we will never be able to really truly pin down who was who. Look at the echo whose soul lives in this chamber and haunts this labyrinth. Pelafina is our foundation. That means her condition comes with her, as well as the way it affects the author. She echoes, for the reader, the true author's pain in reading her letters. You will never, ever be able to tell which of her claims are true and which are hallucinations. And as such, you will never know who was fiction, Johnny or Zampano. The true author's suffering is so immense, deep and traumatizing, it needed to be hidden, presented in a form where only the bravest and most determined would dare enter the labyrinth, which is constructed in such a way that you won't just read it, you'll see it, feel it, know the agony of the architect and the secrets they hid here. And so much of it comes down to the hell of struggling with the antinomies of fact or fiction forever, always wondering which version of the myth is correct, the torture of never knowing the true account of Echo's tale. The only truth you're left with is the outcome and what it did to you, because you never get the full message Echo hears. She can never give you the whole story, the true story from beginning to end. The last few words is all she can ever offer. When you think about it, he took a decade, he took 10 years to write this thing. And it feels like it because of all the layers and little odds and ends and problem solving that you have to do. It would take you 10 months to really lay out everything. I've only taken about 10 weeks. But I do know that we've got a lot of odds and ends, and I would like to solve some of them to the best of our ability here. So let's tackle the first one, the one that everybody asks, which is...
Why is House always in blue?
Exactly. Why is house always in blue? Every single time. If you go to the index and look for the house, the word house, in parentheses where it says house in black, you've got DNE. Does not exist. But house is in blue in there. We've got the blue text, we've got the red text. Sometimes we even get purple text.
Even when house is in another language, it's in blue.
Is it really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, there it is. Yup. House. H-A-U-S.
It's still house, just in a different language.
Yeah. In the novel, we know that red text means repression. It's hidden, omitted, covered up. But it was already known. It was a conscious thought brought forward by the brain, put down and blacked out with ink. All through House of Leaves, the majority of times you see the word blue, it comes in the phrase, out of the blue. Usually that references the sky, which Johnny Truant had a very good feeling about most of the time. The sky reminds him of his dad. It reminds him of good things about his dad. His father loved the sky and it was his joy to fly around in it. Blue is also the color of Thumper's sweater when Johnny first describes her in detail. Blue is the color of the rugs the Davidson couple lays out in the house when they first move in and everything looks perfect, pointing towards a bright future. Blue is also the color of Pelafina's bed sheets at the whale's toe, which she ends up hanging herself with, ending her own suffering. And guess who else has blue bed sheets? Johnny, which he mentions when telling us he bought guns to help him sleep at night. In my opinion, with everything we've seen in House of Leaves, blue really is treated as the opposite of red. It's the opposite of repression. Blue is the pursuit of comfort. Blue is seen as good by the one who looks at it, even in morbid circumstances. The house in the Davidson record and the novel as a whole is blue because a house is synonymous with what Will Davidson and Johnny have never really had. A home. Something that feels good, that feels like a place of rest and comfort and happiness, and everything is pleasant. Even Karen looks at the house in this way. It's meant to be greater for her and Will than any wedding vow. We also get an example of purple in the text at a moment that gives us two mysteries at once. Let's talk about purple first, because we've dealt with it before due to Pelafina's nails. Purple is blue and red mixed together. Comfort and repression meeting, which results in acceptance, or at least the space where healing can occur regarding anything that's been repressed. As for the second mystery surrounding purple in the book, this is a very tough one, because it gives us the same issues as everything else related to Johnny and Zampano in terms of identity. At the very, very end of his diaries, Johnny writes, "I'm sorry, I have nothing left, except this story, what I'm remembering now, too long from the surface of any dawn, the one Doc told me when I was up in Seattle." What I'm remembering now is presented in purple and strike-through text, showing the full convergence of red and blue in the novel. We know Johnny told us the story about his doctor friends in Seattle was a lie, but here he brings it up again and seems to be as genuine as possible in his presentation. After all, he has nothing left for us but this and has just come to terms with his mother's memories and his own. It begins with the birth of a baby, we're told, born with holes in its brain and showing an absence of gray-white differentiation. The child is not breathing and work is immediately done to save the baby. It is put on life support and hooked up to a big machine. The mother lies nearby, watching, seeing only her child and not the machinery. She is told by doctors her son has holes in his brain and most likely will not survive. If he does, he will spend his life hooked up to machines. There's only one outcome to the situation. But the mother resists. She never sleeps. The nurses hear her whispering to him. They hear her sing to him. A second day passes, a second night. Still she doesn't sleep, words pouring out of her, melodies caressing him, tending her little boy. Over the course of 3 days, the mother keeps this up, not even closing her eyes. The staff at the hospital can't believe it and they suspect a miracle will occur. Finally, on the morning of the 4th day, the mother rises and walks over to Dr. Knoll. "I think it's time to unplug him," she says quietly, never lifting her gaze from the floor. The mother returns to her boy, gently drawing her fingers over the top of his head. For a moment, everyone there swears she has stopped breathing, her eyes no longer blinking, focused deeply within him. Then she leans forward and kisses him on the forehead. "You can go now," she says tenderly. And right before everyone's eyes, long before Dr. Knoll or anyone else can turn a dial or touch a switch, the EKG flatlines. In Pelafina's letters, one of the toughest puzzles to decipher is the letter from September 19th, 1988, found on page 632. It looks like another down spiral piece as part of our episodes, but there is a theory behind it. Certain odd formatting sections in House of Leaves reveal shapes when you mentally construct them together across pages. And for this letter, it's believed that, when turned horizontally and mentally connected page to page, the letter represents the end of an EKG reading going into what we're left with. The word safe is given, and then we have a flat line. It feels only right that Johnny's final story, his last revelation, would concern his mother. The woman in the story about the baby very well might be Pelafina, and it relates the loss of her child. This might not just be symbolic. This here is one of the mysteries in House of Leaves that may never truly be solved, because it can really be related to so much. If we take the cue from Johnny referencing his fake doctor friend as the source for the story, we could maybe call it symbolic and say it stands for either him or Zampano with the Davidson record, staying with it from birth to death, as incomplete as it was, with all the holes in its brain. You could take it as Pelafina's consideration of Johnny and her attempts to fill the gaps in his life through her absence by way of sending letters overflowing with love. But if you take it literally, you can apply it in one of two directions, Johnny's life or Zampano's. The easiest guess would be that Johnny wasn't meant to be an only child, and this is how his brother died. That would serve the missing component for his echo of Will Davidson in the story while explaining what traumatized Pelafina and gave her a deep sense of darkness concerning the eventual agony of entertaining a child's life just to see them suffer and die. With Zampano, you could take it a number of directions, and people have. Some floating a theory it's about a baby Pelafina was meant to have with Zampano resulting from an affair, but the baby died, which left her hallucinating Johnny in the whale's toe and Zampano picking up the tail to create a son for them both. There are a number of holes in that logic though, which only begin with acknowledging that no sane person would have written the life of their beloved dead son to be anything resembling what Johnny Truant went through, let alone in such graphic detail. The baby story is a very complicated piece. Despite the mystery of who the story applies to and how, though, the song remains the same and the effect of what's been built over the course of the novel is not diminished in the least. Johnny Truant, Zampano, it doesn't matter which side is more reflective of the real author or their complete relationship to Pelafina, because it's through both of these characters, especially Johnny, that we see the total impact the full course of events had on the writer and what Pelafina meant to them, as well as seeing the agony in what they did to her. Zeus and Echo, Pan and Echo. It doesn't matter in the end, does it? Both endings are the same. And just as surely as Echo's voice persists to this day, someone who loved her is going to miss her. And that's what brings us, at last, to where we've come to rest. You know, you've got to give credit where it's due, even in the parts that feel impenetrable. As much as we can work our way around, retread the book, go all over House of Leaves and search through the index, the appendices, look at outside references that do exist, we will always end up here, under the Yggdrasil tree, staring 10,000 feet up and asking ourselves, what miracle is this? Except it's not really the miracle we're focused on, is it? It's why the miracle even exists, along with all the other bits and pieces that just can't be solved. At least not yet. The last appendix in House of Leaves is from the editors, and it's called Contrary Evidence. It proves that not only are there references by Zampano Johnny claims don't exist that are real, one of which bears Johnny's drawings and came from the Beverly Hills Public Library, it proves that the Davidson record itself might exist. Or maybe it doesn't, and all we have of the Davidson record is Johnny's pitboxing story. It's just a mashup of influences, memories, and ideas borrowed and mixed into a great big contortion of creativity. After all, that's what the collage pictures are, aren't they? Photos of all sorts of pieces of the grand labyrinth and items related to the ideas inside. Stuff in the Davidson record, stuff from Zampano, stuff from Johnny. You'll find a grand mix of it all. Contrary Evidence is baffling. We spent the whole book believing the Davidson record is fiction, and now we're shown direct evidence it may not be, that there are in fact works of art paying tribute to the story. Is this all another hallway? Is this all a fabrication? Are we looking at an extension of the concept that Johnny Truant just hijacked somebody else's partially constructed work and then built it into something he lays claim to? I have about as much of an answer for you regarding this as I do about this tree. Anything I can tell you about Yggdrasil is the same information you'll find on Wikipedia. It's a giant ash tree in Norse mythology that connects the 9 realms of existence. Different worlds all branching out from the Yggdrasil, the center of the universe. What does it mean for the story? Well, technically, every world on Yggdrasil's branches sits in a House of Leaves, right? And what is this novel if not a medium that seems to connect different worlds? but that's just me with my poetic take. All I can offer you for Mysteries Unexplained now is this, the last of what I'm remembering. We know during the final exploration, Will Davidson burns the book he brought with him, and that book is House of Leaves. So why does he do it? Will Davidson is the author's echo, and at the end of House of Leaves, the author comes to the point of acceptance they've needed all along. This house has done its work. There will be no more hiding in the place of denial. Can't stay in the blue forever if you want to heal. That takes merging with red. It was his final tether to the outside before succumbing to the beast of the house and facing his Minotaur head-on. Just as walking to the beach was Johnny and Zampano's moment of embracing the destiny that called, no matter how painful. Because that pain was precisely what they needed to heal. When a bone is broken, if it is not set right, then it will heal the way you left it. If the broken section is not lined up correctly, it results in a warped area called a malunion. The bone has healed wrong. There's a new problem with it now, and it's going to stay that way and cause more problems until something is done. Do you know what the solution is? You have to break the bone again and set it right to heal. You know the bone was broken before. You know it didn't heal correctly. It wasn't taken care of. But you ignored it and kept going, trying to play off the problem until it became too much. And it always was going to end up causing more harm going about things this way. The only path to fix it, to finally heal, is going to cost another break and a new process of recovery. There's no surprise about it this time. You know that injury is the remedy, and you feel all the fear that comes with it. But then you have to take that medicine, because it's going to set you free. And that's what we've seen here for everyone in House of Leaves who suffered a Minotaur. They had a malunion to address, maybe several, deeper and darker than anything you could pick up with an X-ray. And so now, here we lie. We've gone as far east as we can go and met the water. Zampano's end, and Johnny Truant's, as well as our own, traveling with them. What do you make of any of this story when you realize you're in the same place as the true author, trying to discern a reason for it all? Where are we now? What is our matter of why? I think it's what you can see from each character's encounter with the hallway reflected back at us, casting light on our own echoes. Trauma, pain, guilt, regret, torture, helplessness, loss. We all repress the agonies we experience in life, put them in closets, hide them in the dark parts of our brains, try to just move past them, preoccupying ourselves with anything else and saying, "I'm okay," pretending a scar is only physical. Memories bottled up build into Minotaurs. They become ghosts that haunt the houses of our minds and form hallways in our hearts. Malunions formed from breaks, never healed right, and then we wonder why we still have issues. Johnny Truant, Zampano, they were both deeply broken men, echoes of the same deeply broken man, who knew only one way to address his pain. As artists and creators, it's the only way we do any measure of real good in life and why any of it makes sense. It's easy to ask the question now with all that we've seen, if Mark Danielewski is every bit Johnny Truant and Zampano in this regard, channeling what he's experienced into his work. And the answer is both yes and no. It's true what they say. All art is, by nature, autobiographical. And the reason for that is very simple and also very complicated. Something I learned 7 years ago, right about this time actually. I went on a personal journey as a creator to learn from the masters about how the craft of writing is actually done. Read a lot of books, internet articles, and manuals on the art of fiction, piled them all up together on a desk in one place. In my research, I copied down quotes that seemed to speak the truth the loudest. I guess you could say it was my first Nightmind type of project before there ever was a Nightmind, before I had any feelings at all about making videos. The great irony here is that now I really am adding my own footnote at the end of House of Leaves. Referencing something I'd built ages before I'd even get to this point and a couple of years before I'd visit Ash Tree Lane myself. Art shows us how to get through and transcend pain, and a close reading of any tragic work will allow the intelligent reader to see how and why the tragedy took place, and how he personally need not make those mistakes. Great art is cathartic. It is always moral. It is the task of the writer to think his way through all the temporal, private, petty, headline-tormented confusion of his life, and connect with deeper rhythms, either through a conscious exploration of art, history, music, literature, or through personal discipline and meditation. Joyce Carol Oates. The artist must raise everything to a higher level. He is like a pump. Inside him is a great pipe reaching down into the bowels of things, the deepest layers. He sucks up what was pulled beneath the surface and brings it forth into the sunlight in giant sprays. Barnaby Conrad. The meaning of fiction is the grand and glorious leap we make, both as we speak and as we listen, from our own lives to those of others. The meaning of fiction is our empathy, our ability to recognize ourselves in others, others in ourselves. The teller of stories, the writer of fiction, wears a mask that possesses, if the writer has done his job well, the remarkable power to reveal the writer's true face, the writer's truest features. And the listener, the reader of fiction, wears his own mask, a mask that the story strips away to reveal what is nothing less than a startling and miraculous transformation. For the face beneath that mask has become the face of human tragedy and struggle and triumph and grace. It is a face, lo and behold, much like that of fiction's characters, a face precisely like that of the writers. It is the face of empathy, a face always ready to be reshaped, reconfigured, and ultimately transformed. Saul Bellow. And finally, for a quote from someone who says it as curtly and plainly as he can from a position you expect I look to in my research. Fiction is the truth inside the lie. Stephen King. The only quote I have left is one I have to paraphrase because in my research I've misplaced it, but after reading it the first time, it never left me. It has stayed with me to this day and sums up best what I can say about House of Leaves and is the most truthful, powerful way I can relate the meaning of art. A writer does not write to tell a reader his pain. A writer writes to let the reader know he understands their pain. And all of this, coupled with the heart of House of Leaves, is why I consider it the most important work I've ever had the honor and privilege to explore with you. It is more than a curiosity, more than a puzzle, more than an abstract, weird art and alternative scene cult classic. There are reviews you can find on House of Leaves that say everything not by describing the plot, but by describing what the book did to the reader. I've even had the pleasure of people reaching out to tell me what it's done to them and for them as they read the novel in preparation for this exploration series. House of Leaves seems to come into someone's life at the point they truly need it. If it doesn't appear in the form of the novel, it shows up as its companion piece and musical echo, Haunted, created by the artist Poe, Mark Danielewski's sister. She's the one you might remember who rescued the story of Redwood and supported Mark in making sure House of Leaves made it to publication. The story of House of Leaves means a lot to different people. We all have minotaurs to face and pains to heal from, traumas and tortures, guilts and regrets. And it's a long, arduous process. Confusing, disorienting, irritating, frightening, even maddening. But if you make it through everything, if you endure and you keep walking, you make it out of the maze. The journey of Johnny, Zampano, Will, Karen, all these characters, it's in the center of the book's cover, its meaning revealed in a dream Will Davidson had exploring a giant spiral shell that reminds us of the labyrinth's grand staircase. It's a nautilus shell, offering anyone who enters the same opportunity, spiritual evolution. House of Leaves, to me, is the story of a boy and his mother who lost nearly everything. And when the mother had only the boy and the boy had only the mother, the boy was made to see a monster instead of the woman who loved him, and so he ran away. In her grief, she took her own life, and her only living son, who knew he meant the world to her, has never stopped feeling the guilt, pain, and regret over the whole ordeal. Johnny knows what it's like to be called a beast, treated like a beast, and still be loved. He also knows what it means to be a beast and turn away the kindness you've been shown. He can never take back what happened, nor will the story bring back his mother, but it can honor Pelafina in a way that would have made her smile. And for Johnny, as long as he can make this memorial right, that will be enough to start forgiving himself. The house in House of Leaves is blue to me because here in this house, Johnny finally found comfort. Will Davidson and Karen Green found comfort. Zampano found comfort. And we as readers can find comfort too. This house is a place where pain can stop and healing can begin. And that truly is what makes it a home. And for you who have walked so long and gone so far, from the first page to the Yggdrasil tree and now here, from the first confusing minutes of part 1 all the way through each echoing minute of video to this moment, may this too be a welcome home. Thank you for joining in this exploration of House of Leaves. Thank you sincerely for walking all this way with me. It would take a lot of words I would get too choked up trying to say to tell you what this meant to me, and what House of Leaves means to me, but I hope in all my efforts, you've seen it between the lines. Immense thanks to my actor for Johnny Truant, Adam Lundgren, who has been the kindest, most supportive, eager, and accommodating friend and assistant I could have hoped for in this role. Immense thanks to Cory Croft and the Band of Phantoms, who composed the album Leaves, which you've been hearing throughout the series, and created art with an enthusiasm that fueled my own. House of Leaves Explored is the first video series on Nightmind to feature all original music intended for a Nightmind project, and all of it comes from the Leaves EP. Cory Croft is a longtime contributor, assistant, supporter, and friend of Nightmind, and Leaves is his public debut work. I am immensely proud and honored to use it in this series and overjoyed to finally support someone I've known and believed in for years in their first major public outing. If you've enjoyed the music, please look to the video description for links to his artist page and Bandcamp, where the album is available for purchase. And immense thanks to you, of course, and everyone in the House of Leaves challenge. To say I was not prepared for such a major response is an understatement. I have been wonderfully, joyfully overwhelmed by the responses and all the submissions. So many that within just a few days, the task of representing all the submissions became impossible. You have exceeded my greatest expectations, and I am still overjoyed. Thank you, and thank you again. If you read House of Leaves for the House of Leaves challenge and submitted a picture to me or a note or anything, thank you, I did see it. Thank you for being part of this. It really is my sincere wish that you enjoyed your novel experience more than you've enjoyed this series. Nothing I've done here can ever stack up to the actual House of Leaves. No crazy analytical echo project can ever match up to the masterpiece that is House of Leaves. We all know that, including Pantheon Books, who still gave incredible support to this series after my announcement of the House of Leaves challenge. When I began this project, I never envisioned that would happen. And Mark, thank you. Thank you so very much. Not just for your kindness, but for House of Leaves too, and what it's done for myself and thousands of others. As you can see, 20 years later, it's still reaching audiences and making a sincere impact. Finally, my deep gratitude to all the supporters on Patreon who knew what I was up to all this time and believed in me enough to support it. Without the help of my Patreon supporters, this would not have been possible. And without the support of Patreon in general, I would not have been capable of making Nightmind what it's been since 2016. This series was a major undertaking of time, effort, and money, and I'm deeply grateful for all the support in making it happen. Please, if you've enjoyed your experience and wish to see more content like this and even bigger productions, consider joining the Nightmind Patreon for as little as just $1 a month. You'll be guaranteeing the moonlight stays on for the channel, as well as ensuring even the most ambitious ideas for videos and content have resources to come to life. Please do stick around to the end of the video to see the names of everyone supporting Nightmind, who brought you this series and has supported so much content that came before it. Thank you. Really, sincerely, all of you, thank you for looking at an internet challenge from a YouTuber saying to go read a giant sprawling maze of a novel and actually going through with it. Thank you ultimately for believing in me and supporting me. You have supported me, you supported Adam, you supported Cory, you supported Marksy Danielewski, you have supported Poe, you have supported art, and that means everything. We have reached the end, and now there's only one thing I have left to say, which in this last moment I hope says it all. You shall be my roots, and I will be your shade, though the sun burns my leaves. You shall quench my thirst, and I will feed you fruit, though time takes my seed. And when I'm lost and can tell nothing of this earth, you will give me hope. And my voice you will always hear, and my hand you will always have. For I will shelter you, and I will comfort you. And even when we are nothing left, not even in death, I will remember you. Thank you. Once more, I'm Nick Nocturne, and I'll be seeing you again real soon. Sleep tight.